Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and this is the second episode in a new series on upgrading from Dynamics GP and the strategies that go into such a decision. I'm joined once again by Karen Riordan of Menlo Technologies and Peter Joeckel of TurnOnDynamics to continue our conversation. In episode 1, we kind of laid out the landscape of where Dynamics GP customers are today and some of the decisions that they have to make, some of the messaging they're hearing from Microsoft, from the partner channel about what the future holds for them. On this episode, we are looking a little more carefully at what some of those decisions look like and how GP customers are making them. We talk about Business Central itself, executive sponsorship, strategic planning, distinguishing between the different types of GP deployments, and why the customer base has such different approaches already. So let's get started. Okay, Karen and Peter, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having us back.
Yeah, Jason, thanks. Good to be back.
So I wanted to take today's discussion as kind of a continuation of last time. We covered a lot of ground on the last episode, kind of, I would say, thinking kind of holistically about all the different ways that a company running a Microsoft SMB ERP solution, and we kind of focused on GP, how those organizations might be thinking about their future, whether it's sticking with GP, moving from on-premise to the cloud, perhaps, staying with GP, perhaps going to Dynamics 365 Business Central, and even thinking a little broader, like looking at whether Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations is the right choice for some companies too. And so there's really a range of options out there for companies to consider. And what we wanted to do today was to kind of drill into one element of that decision tree, and that's why consider an upgrade at all away from sort of the status quo as it relates to Dynamics GP. And do you want to focus mostly just on GP again today? Because there are other SMB ERPs out there.
Yeah, I think what started this conversation and this particular discussion is the large amount of marketing materials you're seeing, both from a partner standpoint and from Microsoft, targeted very specifically at the GP folks and basically saying, here's what you should do kind of next, here's your upgrade to BC. And that's what kind of spurred this entire conversation, that there's probably more nuance and more decisions around that. And, that's what got most of this conversation started, that, very specific focus right now on GP to Business Central.
All right. Well, where should we start? I mean, I think the first question is, why consider an upgrade? What if you're talking to an organization running Dynamics GP, why are they thinking about an upgrade these days? Karen, I hear you laughing.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. That's the $64,000 question. I was, in this social distancing that we're all dealing with, we do community happy hours, and you never really know who is going to show up on the happy hours. And just last week, we had one, and we were all talking about what we did. And I shared what I was doing with you guys with MS Dynamics and talking about upgrading. And there was a gentleman on the phone who was a small business owner. And he shared with me, I think, really what we've been talking about. He said, it drives me crazy, Karen, when people come in to my office and tell me that I have to do something. Could be an upgrade, could be this, could be that. He says, but they don't show me the value of why I want to make that change. And I think that's kind of what Peter and I have been talking about as well. I mean, if we can't articulate the value of changing or migrating or upgrading, whatever you want to call it, then we haven't done our jobs, or the answer is stay where you are. The other thing that this gentleman said, which I thought was interesting, is he said, a lot of times people think I don't make a decision because I don't want to spend the money. He said, I can assure you, if you show me the value, I will have the cash available to do it. So my recommendation is always starting is, what is the value of upgrading to GP? And who knows? It's an interesting question. You may find not much.
Well, let me ask you from my perspective as, I'm not an ERP expert, but I'm also probably staying up to date on this stuff more than perhaps the average organization, which has ERP, but has lots of other things to worry about in addition to its ERP solution that it maybe owns today. Is it not, to some extent, if I'm running a business and it includes a significant investment in IT infrastructure, ERP solution, other types of solutions, am I not thinking about hopefully on a regular basis how those systems can be improving my business and where maybe the shortcomings are today? And I ask that because to some extent I wonder why, an executive, even at a smaller business, doesn't kind of understand ways that they should at least be evaluating themselves or learning themselves what a newer system could do compared to an older system, rather than someone like one of you going and trying to pitch that to them.
So Jason, you just completely you just hit the nail on the head with why we're talking about this. If you go out there and, start looking at information out there on the web today on, these upgrades from GP to BC, the first thing I noticed was that almost all of the focus is on how we do this, right? And so there's lots of conversations on how this happens, but nobody's asking the question of why we do this, right? And that's the critical question. And if you think about the first thing you do is not, hey, we can do it, so let's go do it. The first thing you should say is, okay, why are we doing it? And, from kind of a high level standpoint, there's probably, 3 major reasons you want to do this. You've outgrown your GP, right? And it's hindering the growth of your business. That's real legitimate. And people are always, in that position in the growth of their company requirements vis-a-vis their ERP. Or maybe they want to move to the cloud, right? Maybe there is a specific reason that their infrastructure is falling down, their costs, et cetera. And maybe there is this interest to move to the cloud. Or the last reason that we see right now is I see a lot of marketing material and my partner's telling me that I should take my GP and move it to BC, right? And so there's a lot of moving parts there that you need to drill down into. And every one of those decisions has some real, meat and potatoes behind it that you need to discuss as a business owner, for example. And that's what we're, hoping to drill into here.
I was having a conversation for another podcast episode that is probably coming out right around the same time as this one with a guy named Gus Krabenborg. He's based in the Netherlands. He's a real veteran of the SMB ERP space as well. And, he sort of maybe takes this conversation in a little different direction that he makes the case anyway, that if a partner is going to be talking to one of their clients about these topics like you just described, they should be ready to talk about some of these value-driven issues and questions themselves. But one of the problems might be that not all partners are ready to have that conversation on a deeper level than, maybe some of the literature that's out there from Microsoft, not in a real consultative way.
Exactly. I mean, that's what Peter and I and a lot of other folks in our industry, we believe in that consultative approach. And just saying, hey, GP 2015 R2 is no longer in mainstream support, that doesn't exactly drive value to the company other than, yikes, we're not in mainstream support. But, you really have to have that discussion with the key stakeholders about how it's going to improve business processes. Are you getting the kind of results from your ERP that you expect? It's really a good time to have those sometimes difficult conversations with the stakeholders, just like you did, hopefully, when you sold them or helped them move to Dynamics GP.
Well, maybe we could talk about some of those points. Peter, did you want to add something?
Yeah. Have you ever heard, in generic sales jargon, but it's very specific in the ERP world, have you ever heard the comment that what you do is you sell benefits, not features and functions?
Yeah, sure.
So think about that. The key there is you don't want to overwhelm people and say, hey, I've got all these bells and whistles. That'd be great for you. What you want to specifically sell them on is here are the specific benefits to your business of, this piece of software, right? And so, one of the immediate thoughts that hit my head is that there's got to be a ton of literature out there right now on what are those main benefits to GP customers moving over to BC. And I'm going to give you an example of what's out there right now. And somebody has said that there are 4 major benefits to moving your Great Plains to Business Central. So the first benefit they mentioned is that it makes you flexible to move teams around so that when you have, salespeople out in the field and they need to access the ERP system, being in the cloud allows them to do that. Yes, it does, but we've been doing that with GP even on-premise forever, right? The second point was enhanced reporting. Now, Enhanced reporting is in the eye of the beholder, and has anybody ever moved an ERP system from one platform to another because they have a different reporting tool? And I think Karen has some good thoughts on the enhanced reporting theory as well. Anyways, the next point was there's a great Microsoft migration tool. Now, I don't care how great that migration tool is, right? And I will say that this one that currently exists has a lot of really nice benefits that they've built into it. But is that a reason as a business owner that you're going to go to a new system because somebody has a migration tool of some level of benefits? And then the last thing that was posited as a benefit to moving was a list of upcoming enhancements in the future to the Business Central. Now, when I sit back and I look at those reasons, right, my head explodes because the expense, the time and effort of taking an entire ERP system, especially if you have a sophisticated enterprise, and moving it onto a brand new platform, none of those pieces move the dial for me. If that's the messaging to the Great Plains environment of users, then I think there's a crying need for people to come in here and discuss this more openly and drill into this and help people make better decisions.
Well, let's talk about some of the better conversations that you think the customer should be having with their partner. I mean, are there some very common hints that a customer might drop or that you might suggest a company look for to kind of gauge how strong their need is to do something beyond the status quo?
Well, I'll start, Peter. Something that we find a lot of times when we go in to talk to our customers before they pay their maintenance plan or, whatever that kind of system checkup is, we find out that they have either made an acquisition, they have changed their business structure. And so now they've created these other GP databases that really don't align, don't give them the kind of consolidated reporting that they need. So sort of almost having that basic question of how has your business changed in the last year? It's amazing how powerful that can be. And in today's business environment, a year is a long time, right? If you talk to customers in January and you talk to them today after this pandemic, everything has changed. And you really have to be willing to have those heart-to-hearts with the appropriate stakeholders. And I drive in support of Jason's statement. You've got to get to the right people so you understand how the business is changing, not how my AP functionality is different or my bank reconciliation needs have changed, but really how my business is changing. And I need an application to grow with that.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like Elizabeth Warren here when she always had a plan for everything. I actually had a post on this topic, and where I introduced my my little rule of thumb, where I called the rule of multis, on how a GP customer could easily identify that they may have or may be outgrowing their their GP implementation. And so, if you take a look at the history of Great Plains. Microsoft actually did some things that deprecated capabilities within Great Plains because they wanted it to, really not be an international multi-location type of product. And so for me, if you start what I call multis, right? If you've gone from a single company to multi-companies, multi-industries, multi-plants, multi-warehouse locations, right? Multi-languages, right? Multi-countries, the more of these multis that you can start ticking off as far as your enterprise is concerned, the more there is a possibility that you're leaning away from the Great Plains and into something that's more of an enterprise solution. And at the time that I kind of developed that, I was focused more on moving folks from the Great Plains platform to the AX at the time, but what is now the D365 F&O solution. So those rules of multis still exist. And here's the worst thing that you could do. You check the box on a bunch of those multis, right? And somebody tells you all of those things happen over here, perhaps in BC, and you move to BC and you find out that there's a lot of nuance behind that functionality, that you might be doing it, to a degree, but not really to the degree that you need it fully. So that kind of rule of multis, was my number one, here's your, thumbs up if you think you've outgrown the functionality.
So Jason, before you jump
Sure.
in, Peter is so accurate. And I find that we recommend the solutions that we know. Our old CEO and myself went in and did a business discovery with a prospect. And when we walked out, we both said, definitely. And I said GP and he said SL. He was from the SL world. And we just both started laughing because we both knew what we know. And you have a tendency to, find ways to make those requirements fit within the product or the solution, which is why it's been really challenging at sometimes, Jason, you and I having these conversations because, you have to think beyond your own application or what you know really well and maybe partner with people in order to get a customer in the right product. But it was just, we both said it at exactly the same time. No doubt about it. They are. And we sat in the same meeting. We heard the same requirements and we both put it in to the product that we knew the best.
That's maybe not that surprising. I've probably heard that before too. Well, let me ask, one of the things I was thinking about in leading up to this conversation was the roles within a GP customer that might be pushing for or against the change. You mentioned, Karen, a small business owner saying, my partner hasn't made the case. I've seen the marketing materials, but I don't know why I want to move away from my current system. I don't know. Are there particular roles or maybe particular personas that you each encounter within an organization that are either gung-ho for some version of digital transformation or that are really hesitant, or does it just vary depending on the people?
So what I typically see is that when we're talking about this move to Business Central, the IT department is usually very much in favor of that. You might call it part of their digital transformation, or whatever is the, going jargon of the day. But for them, it's this idea that they get on new technology, they get to leverage the Microsoft platform. And so it can be a pretty exciting thing for the group within the IT department. But what gets missed is the requirements of the finance team. And we can't lose sight of the fact that Business Central is, at its heart, a financial application, a financial management solution. And so sometimes, particularly with Business Central, we're finding that the accounting team is sort of getting pulled into these discussions and into this migration because of the IT group. So trying to navigate that waters and make sure that the finance team and all their needs are actually being taken care of is something that we find we need to spend a little more time in. But usually the IT groups, they're pretty psyched about moving to Business Central and the Microsoft platform.
Yeah, boy, Karen, you've got such a kind take on this topic. This is something where I have to put my grumpy old guy hat on. It literally occurred to me within the past year, I believe, that when I started off in this business, that all of these projects were led by the business folks, whether those are the accounting folks, the inventory folks, the manufacturing guys, or some combination of the business side. And what would happen is those guys would drive the decision and IT supported the business. And very slowly, with the encroachment of technology into the ERP world, that thing is completely 100% flipped on its head. And I realized that one day when I was sitting there thinking to myself, oh my gosh, every single project that I'm working on is led by an IT department. And, that can be either really, really good or really, really bad, depending on, what the IT focus is and how in tune the IT folks are with the, with the business side. And so, there are some technologies that just weren't designed to improve accounting systems, right? So anybody that thinks that, Windows and the mouse improve data entry on an accounting system, hasn't watched anybody do data entry. And so this whole thing, with the move to the cloud, yes, there is tremendous benefits, especially if you can shift that workload from internally, having to manage this and having to continually stay up to date on equipment. There are tremendous advantages. But again, as we talked about, one of these things is if you're going to move to the cloud, maybe it doesn't automatically have to be the latest and greatest. Maybe you can just move your current version of Great Plains that you're happy with running, to one of the many, cloud solutions that you could develop on your own, or onto, one of the cloud hosting companies that has it. But huge difference in how these projects now, are run with the focus of IT folks as opposed to the business leading these.
Yeah, how big is that to me, that, like you just mentioned, Peter, the idea of just sort of taking an existing GP solution and placing it in the cloud, so to speak, seems like that maybe the most incremental change. Can we talk just a little bit about sort of what that really means? I mean, to me, it seems like maybe that's almost purely an IT decision, because it's really not changing too much about, if anything, about the way the organization's actually running. Maybe there are a few ways that it can either improve or create a bit of risk. I don't know. Anything else that's really key about making a move like that you would highlight here?
The bottom line on this is, and, in my mind, I always, I try to distinguish between what I would call a QuickBooks implementation and a more sophisticated use of Great Plains that starts, really stretching the capabilities from a size, company size, requirements, et cetera. And so there is such a broad use of Great Plains that, all the way from, it's kind of like being used like QuickBooks, very marginally, to, very, very sophisticated requirements, and we're bursting at the seams and we're killing it with, multiple, ISV solutions, et cetera. And so I always think about this as we move towards, the end of this, where this becomes more of an enterprise solution. And the move of an enterprise solution from one system to another, the cost has nothing to do. The cost of the hardware and the the software and all of that stuff is almost irrelevant. The real cost in moving these systems is all of that cost of having to take an entire system and generate all of the enthusiasm and excitement and knowledge to completely move something to a new platform. And those are costs that are never, they're never calculated, right? But those are much, much bigger than all the other considerations. So to me, if you're running on Great Plains and it runs great and you don't have this bursting at the seams and, oh my gosh, we could really grow if we could only do this that the Great Plains is never going to do, taking that entire system and moving it and doing a reimplementation into a new system, and believe me, these are reimplementations, they are not upgrades, regardless of how fancy the tools become. The cost to make a lateral move just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's funny. We get asked the question a lot. Well, how long is it going to take, right, to implement a new system? And, we might say the generic is 4 to 6 months. And the 4 to 6 months, oh my gosh, it must be so complex if it takes so long, and trying to help them understand, well, it may be complex or it may not, but you guys have your day job to do, right? And for you to take the time to consume, digest a new accounting system takes a lot of time. It's not something that can be done overnight. I mean, the kinds of ERP solutions that Peter and I are talking about, they're not QuickBooks. They do require thought and design and training to be put into it. So I couldn't agree with you more. It's more than just the cost of the software. There's a whole people cost that is often overlooked.
All right. I mean, the one thing I'm taking away from today's conversation, if nothing else, is just how important, what the value is of a good IT director or CIO, perhaps, depending on the organization, and how in tune they can be with the CEO or managing director, whoever's kind of calling the shots of the business. Because, without the ability to explain some of these needs and plans and future vision, and then actually make them into some kind of a practical set of requirements and goals, it's a real challenge to even plan for one of these projects.
Yeah, so true. I mean, you have to go into this as a business analyst, almost to help a customer determine if it's the right time to move. And I say that, is it the right time to move? We all recognize that probably upgrades and migrations are going to be in a customer's wheelhouse at some point. The thing that I believe good partners do is you stay engaged, continue to educate, and, help them understand when it's the right time to move, but don't force it if it doesn't really add value.
Yeah, and that's basically the key takeaway, is that this is not a no-brainer. Hey, I'm on GP. Let's take it and move it over to Business Central. And, like I said, what Karen and I have seen in the market space as far as messaging, that kind of leads you to believe that's the deal. our entire conversation wrapped around that. Well, wait, hold on a second. There's a lot more to consider, and there's a lot of nuance, and you need to dig into those instead of just saying, hey, this is the natural path.
One last question. I don't know how good this one is, but we touched on coronavirus a little earlier. In your observation, has the pressure that's put sort of economically, maybe logistically, organizationally on companies changed the way that they prioritize some of these needs, or maybe the way that the lens through which they're seeing them? Have you had any experience with that, in recent weeks?
So I'll go first, Peter. We have seen this conversation kind of bubble to the top, understandably. We actually at Menlo Technologies do a lot of hosting, and we've helped a lot of customers move from that on-premise over to a hosting environment. And again, that's one of the options that we're going to be talking about. Again, if GP works for you, but you need to go to the cloud, have remote access, hosting is a viable option. But I will admit, we're trying very hard just to respect that there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in our customers and in our prospects, and reminding them just to take a deep breath. We'll help you get through what you need to do today, but let's not make a hasty decision because of where we are today. If just, helping you limp along until you can figure things out, then we're going to be there. But again, I would really encourage people to not get wrapped up in all of the FUD. Take the time, still do what you need to do, but make the right business decision.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I think right now what we're seeing as far as companies out there's, winners and losers as far as from a company standpoint, based on, where you are as far as a business and relationship to how you're impacted. The big thing that everybody, I believe, is going to be looking for is value, right? So I don't think anybody wants to go on any wild projects. What everybody is going to be looking for is they're going to be looking for more value. How do I take my existing investment and make it more valuable? Or how do I take the fact that I'm a big winner, based on this, and how do I, keep up to that with my ERP? So to me, value is the big, especially value in existing investment. That's the big keyword for me right now that I'm hearing.
All right, excellent. Well, thanks once again for your time, for both of you. I think we've really set things up to maybe move on to another stage of this overall conversation next time. We have Business Central, obviously. We have functionality of GP. We have this decision between, Business Central versus other ERP solutions if you are in an older ERP. So I look forward to tackling some of those questions and debates with you next time.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Yeah, stay safe. Make sure you stay 6 feet apart from everybody.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Karen and Peter for joining me once again. We will be back soon with another episode in this series. I'm really looking forward to it. If you want to get in touch in the meantime, you can reach out to me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can also find us and follow us on Twitter. You can find us at MSDynamicsWorld. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.